Check.
Yep, we get you.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this last event of Buzz and Review for this year. Most of you probably have been on day 2 and day 1. That have been happening throughout the last 2 weeks. Today is going to be day 3, which is the closing day with the theme Enhancing the Brain. Probably we're going to wait for some 2 minutes for everybody to get in. But during that time, probably I'll take it to introduce a bit of what's been going on and who I am and stuff like this. So this is NeuroTech. Welcome here. Most of you, I'm sure, are part of the community, and if you're not, you're more than welcome to join, and that's part of why these events happen. As you know, well, as you might not know as well, that NeuroTech is the largest global community and global organization for neurotechers around the world, which means people come from academia, industry, and so on. So we're an amazing community of people that are just enthusiasts, people who are academics, researchers, leading industry players, and so on. And we all come together to support each other and then fuel the whole industry and the whole development of neurotechnology, which is not very new, but in the last years have been kind of taking track and showing a lot of promising results with an incredible kind of landscape of new companies and startups and programs and educational programs. And one of them is actually in collaboration with NeuroTech, and we're going to be talking about this later throughout the presentation. Today we have a special guest, probably 2 as well. We have Dr. Chen, who will later as well share with us his thoughts and practice on neuroethics. And we have Christopher Guger, who is the founder of Dept, a leading neurotech company, to tell us more about one special product they have, in addition to a lot of the amazing stuff they do there. I think that is kind of it for an introduction. I must say as well that Buzz and Review is usually an event where we cover several things. We cover our last year in terms of chapter updates, community updates, but at the same time, we do it to bring all the updates from the industry and what's been happening in terms of breakthroughs and events. Here's our keynote speaker, Dr. Francis Shen. And as I mentioned, this event has been sponsored by GTech and HealthTech, and Dr. Christopher Guger is going to be giving us a 20-minute presentation at the end to cover more around this. I think it's 05 already, and we might just start this. So I want to welcome everyone who has been joining within these window 5 minutes. My name is Firas, and I'm actually the chapter lead of NeuroTech Barcelona and Beirut, which is the Barcelona chapter of NeuroTech. If you're new to the concept, NeuroTech operates through. Oh, I'm sorry. I've just been told I'm not sharing my screen. Thanks for the heads up, Brian, and let me do that. Yeah, I hope everyone here can see my screen already. That was a quick introduction. I just want to mention that here is our guest speaker today, our special keynote, who's going to share with us his thoughts and practice on neuroethics, and as well our sponsor, GTech and HealthTech, with Dr. Christopher Guger, who will cover a bit of the presentation in the end. As I introduced myself, I'm the chapter lead of Barcelona chapter of NeuroTech, which is a local chapter that operates with other chapters and makes other events and so on. So if you're new to the concept, NeuroTech operate in chapters, and if you happen to be in one of the cities that doesn't have a NeuroTech chapter yet, probably you're the right person to start the next chapter. You're going to see a bit more throughout about that. So let's start with the chapter highlights then that we are here. Our newest chapter, NTX Belgrade, just kicked off their activities with the Brain Awareness Week event. They presented a BCI system that provides visual and auditory feedback based on heart rate synchronization and some other really cool neurotech gadgets. In parallel, we've got Paris, which is one of the great chapters and very active in neurotech, in the neurotech space in the world. And then they have recently had a booth at the Bordeaux Cognitive Sciences Forum, in addition to a lot of other stuff. And as well in May, NTX Paris is launching a big experimental study inside the Museum of Natural History in Paris within the upcoming days with physiological data acquisition and a series of questionnaires for the new immersive and sensorial sensory odyssey exhibition. So if you happen to be around these days from May 19, 23rd, June 2 to June 9 this year, it's a good idea to pass by. As well, this is one very close to me personally, because I was part of the amazing team who worked together to put this event. It's the inaugural NeuroTech X Global Hackathon, which happened in 2 stages. The first one was a crazy, insane sprint of a long weekend where we came together to make incredible stuff. And then it was followed by the Brain Age Prediction Data Challenge, which was a challenge where participants had 2 weeks to develop machine learning models and play around to predict the age of patients based on their EEG data signals. The competition was around 2 weeks long, and then we've had really awesome results of this. So where to start? I think the best way to start with this is first to thank everyone who joined us from our NTX community, from sponsors locally and globally, and for sure, everyone who made this happen, from our more than 600 participants who came in from all around the world in one server to create this. So as I said, this hackathon was mainly online, but at the same time, this hackathon was hosted in person locations all over the world. So based from the NeuroTech X chapters that are running in these cities, they hosted locally, and we were functioning as well globally throughout the world. So shout out to Paris, Barcelona, Belgrade, Munich, San Francisco, and New York as well, which was a bit of a last minute kind of in hosting, but it was one of the great moments that we had. And as I mentioned before, this is a community that really brings together people from all different backgrounds and all different professional kind of knowledge on neurotech. And what that means is we had to make several tracks, right? So we had to kind of cater for everyone and then make people come together, not only to just kind of flex, right? We want people to come in as a first interaction on neurotech and learn with other community members. So we had 3 tracks. The first track was more tech and hands-on, where people were developing actual prototypes for products. The other was a data challenge, which I just mentioned. And the final one was the design and strategy track, which was more involved with ethics, design, everyday stuff, and everything else, right? So this was the best way for people to come in and learn about how to implement neurotechnology into whatever they had as a background. And definitely no hackathon ends up well without a prize pool. And then we had a really awesome prize pool that was very much diversified as well, from hardware, where we had some kits to service and consultancy, some cash prizes, and finally a professional kind of wearable with semi-dry electrodes from BrainTrain that actually was as well used in the hackathon. And we had some local prizes too in some other chapters, such as Paris, where we had some extra hardware there. In addition to all this, we've had an awesome lineup of speakers. This was our opening speaker speaking about the current and future applications on BCI, given what GTech is doing and given what's been happening throughout the last years. It was a good way to kick off the day with an idea for everyone on what BCI can be, what are possibilities for its future, and then what is its current applications. I'm going to go fast through what we had, because all these are recorded and then you have access to them and you can definitely watch them. So we were kind of trying to diversify this so people get an idea on not just technology, but as well tools to bring together the community, to understand better from industry experts, different EEG applications such as mobile EEG devices, and that was one of the prizes. Right, then we had Guillaume, who's part of the Barcelona chapter, to talk us more about implantable neural interfaces. And then we've had researchers who came in, talk about their research as well. And then finally, for the first half of the day, we still have more, definitely. Here was more about clinical application, education, and opportunities for careers in neurotech, which not a lot of people are familiar with. And then finally, some more in-depth stuff, such as markers for a better BCI. And we have Sylvain, who was part of the chapter as well in Paris, who talked to us about art in BCI, which is a completely different kind of attitude towards it. And definitely the one and only Olivier Oulier, who came in for an amazing, not just a talk, but a discussion as well, which was very enriching on neuroethics. And you're right, a topic that Dr. Shen today will cover to us as well. Before the keynote, we've had our last and very much interesting to me personally topic, which was more about neuro twins and how we can create digital twins of human brains to kind of do some research and experimentation and diagnostics on that. And that's what NeuroElectrics in Barcelona is up to. And then finally, we closed it with Benjamin, who was our keynote speaker, discussing patient advocacy matters in the world of neurotechnology and BCI specifically. With all that, the best way to conclude this was to bring together the best lineup of judges we could get by getting people who were from, again, operating from leading clinics, universities, industry, entrepreneurship, and so on. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these faces already, if you're in the community, and if not, it's a very good way to get familiar with them.
Hello,
so
Dimitri.
Before we jump to this slide, this is one of the outcomes of the hackathon.
Hello, Dimitri.
I'll comment on it in a second.
How are you? I'm fine, thank you. What are you doing here? Wow, this is really interesting. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
So yeah, I thought that was the best way to close the chapter on briefing you guys on the hackathon, which was one of the highlight events for last year. This is one of the projects, and if you're wondering what I mean by projects, we've had 600 people come in to form something that was around 70 teams, and then we've had amazing deliveries where we filtered out the best 50 that the judges were actually going through and being presented by to choose. And this was one of the projects where we were using feedback to kind of transform movement into text, obviously, as you see on the screen. And that person was able to actually communicate through his hand movement and through his electrical activity on his muscles. This is a bit of how the hackathon looked in Paris, and we've been kind of collecting shots from different chapters all over the world. These are this is the organizing team from Paris as well. This is Lisa leading the chapter in Munich, and that was the way they kickstarted their day there. This is a bit of action in Belgrade, where teams came together to develop really, really amazing projects. This was hosted in a place where people were used to work with these things, so development there was moving in a really, really interesting manner. And that was actually the kickoff event for the chapter there, which was reactivated through the hackathon, which makes things even feel 10 times better. And then, well, these are post-hackathon photos, and this is an experiment in Barcelona on the right, thinking about the pizza packets from Paris on the left. I just put this together to finish up this. That was the vibe in Barcelona too. And then from there, I want to go to the second part, which I thought was great to share with you guys, because I know that there's a lot of people here curious about the community itself. We've got the Slack, we've got a lot of channels where people communicate from Discord as well, but the hackathon itself, where people came together during these intense 3 days, was a great way to interact with a lot of people around the community, see what they're up to, and draw some collaborations. I'm going to talk about my personal experience here. So from this event, I've been in contact since then with several people, and at the moment we are developing brain painting artwork, which is a piece of art that uses brain data using wearable EEGs, non-invasive. I mean, these are artistic images, of course, but the idea here is we transform brain signals into visual art. But the idea is there to study the impact and how we can enhance people's calmness based on their. I mean, it's a kind of a feedback loop between what we generate and then what affects us as well. So this is a bit of the visualizations that we've been working on, and this is something that I'm working on for someone who I met in the hackathon. The other thing that is great, which is just like we had speakers and sponsors from industry partners, we've joined as a representative of the Barcelona chapter of NeuroTech, the masterclass, the NeuroTech masterclass in Spain that was held for the first time, talking about the perspective and the future of the democratization of neurotechnology and its creative applications. Because for someone like me coming from a design background, the main reason why I thought NeuroTech X was interesting is because I was thinking, how can I apply this to my domain, right? And then I can be talking here forever about what I've been doing bringing this in. But I think one of the really cool stuff is integrating this within workflows that are mainly design oriented and artistic. Here is another workflow that we've been working on as well, where we're integrating biodata and simulating it in an artistic way. Not to mention a lot of the other hackathons that have been happening across community. And then I want to come to kind of the last 2 points that came out of community. Saying that, as you might know, neurotech, in terms of the term itself, has been searched more than ever, and development has been skyrocketing as well. We've been mapping roughly the neuromarketing companies and stuff like this, but at the same time, you see we have this amazing kind of landscape of companies and startups and communities and associations and funds and pharma companies and consultancies and so on. That make up all this really rich landscape, right? But for this, as a lot of you might know, on NeuroTech's website, we've got an Airtable that actually has a lot of the academia and industry. But at the same time, one of the people who were participating in the hackathon, actually, we reached out and we got in contact based on the hackathon. And one of the things he's doing is BCI Wiki, which I invite you all to check out. It's a platform that uses a lot of the resources around and engages community members from NeuroTech X as well to come together and using some of the tools to create this page, which is really helpful for everyone in the community, right? This is a page that, just like a Wikipedia page, it's just the same, but for BCI. So it covers a lot of the things from books to hardware, software, and so on. And it's obviously automated based on scraping. So this is something that whoever wants to be a contributor is more than welcome, as it's all open for the community. So the last thing I'll come to is this is my first interaction with brain-computer interfaces and neurotechnology, when I was thinking, what if we can measure how spaces actually affect our brains? So I ended up doing a device where I plugged in some biosensors and at the same time some spatial sensors. And I thought, okay, what if I can overlap these two data channels, and then I can understand using some correlational mapping the relation between this, right? And this is something that has been done before. This was done some 7 years ago. And then I was trying to kind of map spaces and understand how people feel within spaces, understand the impact of how we feel on our perception of space, but at the same time, the impact of space on how we feel, right? And it was only until the end of last year, just after the hackathon, where I met a person working on exactly the same thing, right? Developing this kind of wearable which collects biodata from facial muscles to heart rate, skin conductance, and brainwaves, obviously, and then maps this geographically based on the location to produce maps that look like this. These are maps that show us where people were walking, but at the same time, the colors you see are decoded as emotions. And then this gives us a cool way to understand how people's emotions in space can be actually visualized and understood in a much better way. And all this, I just wanted to bring this up to highlight a bit of what community interaction can produce and what events like the hackathon can produce beyond the hackathon itself and the event itself. And finally, I thought I'd close that chapter with two images that I think are going to be more relevant as Dr. Christopher is going to be coming in. And this is something that we are working on at the moment, which is thinking about what neurotechnology can bring into the metaverse. I just highlight this because this is a photo that dates back to the beginning of the 2000s, from 2000 to 2006, where these guys were working on Space Invaders, which was one of the first. Right, and then second, this book that came out around that time as well about brain-computer interfaces for virtual reality, which I think is becoming more relevant than ever. And if you're someone who's into these things, you definitely need to check the NeuroTech gaming series that's already on YouTube, which was happening last year or the year before. It's on YouTube. Just type NeuroTech gaming NTX and you'll find it. It's an amazing video series dealing with neurotechnology in VR and gaming. The other highlight away from the hackathon itself, the new chapters and the community stuff that I wanted to highlight is the NeuroTech Challenge series. It's a series of research. Sorry. It's a collaborative initiative from NeuroTech X, OpenBCI, and the EEG Notebooks coordinative team and the research at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, the University of Toronto. So the phase, it's in several phases, and then I think we should be sharing some links in the chat as well, if that's possible. If you're interested, please reach out, but definitely I'll make sure we share some links for everyone to sign up and become a participant. But the phase one of this is a study led by the Center of Addiction and Mental Health at the University of Toronto research team. In this citizen science study, participants will be given the opportunity to be both subject and experimental at the same time, collecting their own brain data from classic EEG experiments using the EEG notebooks that we highlighted before, which is a software library, and contributing to a large-scale open access database dataset building initiative. And definitely everyone here can be a participant, so you can sign up. The other one, which excites me almost the most, is the NeuroTech micro-credential program, which is a breakthrough in this where a community actually managed to create a program. This is thanks to the funding from the Ontario government in Canada, Queen's University, and NeuroTech X coming together to make this happen. The micro-credentials program is a practical, hands-on program that is an introduction to neurotechnology. So if you're new in this, you're interested in knowing more, definitely there's a lot of content on the NTX GitHub and website for educational purposes. But at the same time, this is a micro-credentials program that I'm looking forward to join as well. It's going to be open starting March 23, but you can already check it on the website as well. It's www.neurotechmicrocreds.com. Another thing, which is I think at the foundation of every community, is the student club. The end of November of last year was the award ceremony for the annual NTX Student Club competition, with really amazing projects. And then if you haven't been able to check this out already, I'll be sharing a link as well for more on this. But these are the highlighted winners, as you can see here. So now we're going to get to three kind of blocks where we cover a bit of the updates in therapeutics, applications, market, the industry, and some highlights in terms of news blogs from last year. So let's just go straight in where, I might just as well read the headlines too, where zapping the brain and nerves could treat COVID, right? So doctors are still trying to understand and find treatments for long COVID, which can definitely be a huge trouble for a lot of patients for many months and so on. So Maren Dixon, coordinator of neural engineering at the City College of New York and co-founder of the neurotech company Soterix Medical, which supplied simulators geared to several research groups. And at the Medical University of South Carolina as well, Psychiatry professor Mark George tried a different neurostimulation approach in a pilot study of 20 patients that he began in late 2020. His study used an at-home device that stimulated the vagus nerve, which you guys might be familiar with, one of the most important, through the ear. George's team assembled a real tough briefcase with a whole bunch of good stuff inside, and that's a quote. I'm quoting him on this, likening the equipment to Mission Impossible supplies. Each patient got an iPad for telemedicine consultations and symptom surveys, the stimulation device, and a portable ICU, which is definitely the most valuable part, were wearables that measure heart rate, oxygen saturation, and blood pressure. Another highlight is from April, where, I mean, this is something that touches everyone here. The number of Americans with visual impairment or blindness is expected to jump more than 8 million by the year 2050. Age-related eye disease and conditions are expected to swell during what's being called the silver tsunami. So here, we just want to highlight that this team of researchers was able to resolve this. And for this, I'm going to quote here as well. The technology is advantageous since no surgery is required and no device will be implanted inside the body, says Dr. Liu. He's a PhD student in the lab of Kifa Zhu, who's a professor of biomedical engineering and ophthalmology at USC. Well, I'm going to quote as well, saying that right now we're doing animal studies, trying to use ultrasound stimulation to replace electric stimulation. The research group is led by Zhu and Mark Humayun, professor of ophthalmology and biomedical engineering at USC and one of the inventors of Argosy. Right, so here blind eyes were stimulated by mechanical pressures generated by ultrasound waves applying pressure to the eye, which can then activate the neurons and send signals to the brain. Another here, where a hospital in Bristol is believed to be the first in the world to implant the smallest device into a brain to reverse the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And as you know, this is a disease that relates to a lot of other stuff that we're going to cover through the presentation too. Southwell Hospital surgeons used a tiny deep brain stimulation device to override abnormal brain cell firing patterns caused by Parkinson's. 25 patients have been selected for the trial that concluded next year. Tony Howells, the first person to receive the treatment as part of a trial, said the impact was amazing. So for Mr. Howells, who had the operation 3 years ago in 2019, said before the operation, he went for a walk on Boxing Day with his wife and got 20 yards, something around 180 meters for the actual car. Yeah, he said, I had to turn around and go back because I just couldn't walk. Then after the operation, which was 12 months later, he went on Boxing Day again, and he went for 2.5 miles rather than 200 yards. And he couldn't be more amazed by that. Another, which is an amazing wearable, where it's a neck patch that can diagnose concussions. The prototype patch in this research is shown in this image on image A, where you see the patch. Right, Dr. Sepulveda from Michigan State University and his students kitted out crash test dummies with 4 of their piezoelectric devices on one on the throat, one on the neck, and one on each side of the neck. They performed stimulated whiplash experiments on the dummies and found that the Band-Aid size patch they have placed there accurately captured indicators of brain injury. The sensors transformed tensile strains applied to the neck into voltage pulses, and that electrical output proved highly predictive of rotational forces deep in the head, as measured by accelerometers implanted inside dummies' nose. Because Sepulveda's devices are self-powered, there are no batteries to swap out or recharged. And I mean, batteries is a big topic that as well. You're going to see one awesome thing that's coming up next too. I mean, in parallel for decades, opioids have, dominated pain management, but the drugs are frequently ineffective for chronic pain and can lead to addiction. Northwestern University have developed a miniaturized implant that they say treats pain in rats by simply cooling the peripheral nerves that transmit information between the brain and the rest of the body. This soft implant, described in the paper, published on June 30th, something around that, well, half a year last year, in Science, is made from water-soluble biocompatible material that allow it to wrap around peripheral nerves just like a cuff. Its unique engineering allows it to target and cool nerves in an area as small as several millimeters, making the device far more effective than other precise nerve cooling technologies that can damage the surrounding muscle tissue. So from here, we move to the stretchable artificial nerves, helping restore motion in mice. Most of you have seen a lot of implanted mice in labs and so on. And this is the first example of delivering biological neural signals through biomimetic electronic nerves to biological organs. And this team from Stanford and Seoul National University together highlight this new neuroprosthetic approach that is more flexible and less power hungry than other devices. Because as we know, these implants are very, very, very power hungry, and this is something that we're going to see in one of the future slides here. And as everyone might know, the ambition, to bring back movement is one of humanity's dreams forever. Restoring movement through neurostimulation, objective achieved for Agilis project, which is at phase 2 here. This to enable people suffering from tetraplegia to regain their autonomy. And here, using implantable brain-computer interfaces, we have people who are able to kind of move back their limbs. And then just before we close this chapter, that's a spinal cord implant that allows paralyzed people to walk in just a day. Sounds like a bit of some magic here. Michael Ricciardi never thought he'd walk again, which is the patient highlighted. Much less swim, definitely not to cycle or paddle a kayak, as you see in the photo. This was due to a terrifying motorcycle collision in 2017 that damaged spinal cord, leaving him completely paralyzed from the waist down. With this new spinal cord implant that bridges signals from the brain to his lower muscles, hopping over damaged portions to restore movement. You might as well imagine how it works, right? So whenever there's a part of the spinal cord that's damaged, we can just bridge over it, transmit data through these implants, right? Once the implant was placed near the lower back of the patient, the team next connected it to the Medtronic device inside the abdomen. FDA approved, the device is generally used for deep brain stimulation, but was co-opted here to help participants control stimulation at will. Add in a tablet and a simple clicker, and they could easily now switch between different stimulation patterns to support an activity, standing, walking, swimming, and so on. One thing to mention for sure, because it's a highlight, that this setup just took 1 hour. Another, which is something that's more relevant with all the media stuff we have around us, which is brain stimulation that can improve memory in older adults especially, where researchers from Boston University report that daily electrical brain stimulation for 20 minutes on 4 consecutive days showed memory improvement in seniors for at least a month. Non-invasive procedure was found to have benefits for both working memory and long-term memory. If I might quote as well, people perform this process for 20 minutes each day on 4 days, and then tested their ability to memorize and recall words 1 month after without electrical energy. Based on the reports, the participants showed memory improvements by the second or third day. They could now remember and recall more words than usual. And this improvement could be seen even after 1 month. Participants who started out with the lowest cognitive performance were the ones who benefited the most from this brain stimulation. And finally, just before finally, the headset, this headset by Cognito will deliver light and sound at a frequency that, according to prior cognitive studies, including one in the Journal of Neurology, delivers improved cognitive ability among people with Alzheimer's. Cognito, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, will also show research about the effects of its device on the deterioration of the brain's white matter, which is the intertwining neural, on brain matter, the intertwining neural connections that link all 4 lobes of the brain. To say abnormalities in white matter and the insulating layer that surrounds it, called myelin, which a lot of you might be familiar with as well, are associated directly with Alzheimer's. Cognito's non-invasive and resembles wraparound sunglasses that we usually wear as VR goggles or sunglasses or so on. So it's something that people are used to put on. And it works using neuromodulation, meaning direct alterations of nerve activity by outside stimulus. The headset transmits light and sound, as I mentioned before, at a frequency of something around 40 times per second. The light is more of a flicker than a flash, as they have mentioned, and patients can wear it at home rather than going to a clinic. So now our second block, which is one that's going to cover more tech innovation within the space, where for the first time, scientists have invented a non-invasive way to control the brain circuits, the clusters, which are the clusters of neurons in the brain that collectively perform a specific task. So they have been able to invent a non-invasive way to control the brain circuits of freely moving lab animals from a distance, wireless control. The new technique, which beams near infrared light into the brain, may help researchers analyze how the brain works during normal behavior and may one day lead to new treatments for brain disease in people, in humans as well. And that's kind of a milestone here, where most of you might be familiar with the Utah array. And that's a new brain-computer interface which has a flexible backing, which definitely excites a lot of people within the community. Where engineers and researchers have got this advanced brain-computer interface with a flexible, moldable backing and penetrating microneedles. As you might know, these are very tiny needles, something around 10 times thinner than a human hair. And by adding a flexible backing to this kind of brain-computer interface, it allows it as a device to be even more evenly comfortable and evenly conform to the brain, to all the brain's ups and downs and formations with this flexible thing. Which means that now it can penetrate the surface area of the brain tissue without piercing surface venules, right? Because it's very thin, and of course signals from nearby nerve cells evenly across all the area that is subjected at the cortex. So this new brain computer interface is on par with and outperforms as suggested. It's definitely its competitor, the one the Utah array, which is the existing gold standard for brain-computer interfaces with penetrating microneedles. Talking about batteries, which is a topic that comes quite frequently when we talk about invasive stuff and came already twice in this presentation. As you know, the batteries that power deep brain stimulation implants usually last for 3 years. However, they need to change them, which means surgery likely to happen, which is used to replace these bulky batteries, and then definitely adds some cost and some risk of, infection probably as well, right? So deep brain stimulators as energy monsters, as we say. So the battery runs out very quickly. And then what we're doing here is something that is definitely on the opposite side of the spectrum. So these devices rely on the buildup of electrical charge what repeated movement caused in their two electrodes made of dissimilar materials to separate and come together. So they have been demonstrated to generate power from footsteps, muscle movement, wind, among other things. And something that we repeatedly do is breathing, probably from muscle movement for breathing. These batteries can power up and then function autonomously. The NeuroString, which is one of my favorites, which is a stretchable probe that measures brain chemicals central to Parkinson's, depression, and gut disease. You might as well have heard the expression, your gut is your second brain. Imbalances in brain chemistry are at the heart of many neurologic diseases. These same brain chemicals also play roles in gut health. So scientists at Stanford have invented NeuroString, which is a soft implantable probe that actually can interface seamlessly between both your brain and your second brain, your gut. The probe is made of graphene, a form of carbon, and increasingly trendy lately in a lot of small tech, by Professor Bao, where Bao teams used a laser to engrave hairy entangled network of graphene and encoding this statement into plastic, right? The plastic contains molecules that turn into nanoparticle dots on the surface of graphene and can improve the sensitivity and selectivity of stimulus for simultaneous measurement of dopamine and serotonin, one of the two electrical chemicals that are responsible for how we do things. The researchers then embedded the network in a rubber matrix. The guys with Dr. Lee as well explained that graphene itself is not very stretchable, but if it's entangled as a mesh and embodied in a rubber, then it becomes stretchable. So this is talking here about the impact on form, on performance. And our third block, which is more on updates from the industry, which I'm sure a lot of you are excited about. So here's one where Galvani Bioelectronics and Case Western Reserve University, the research come together. The research team that led this project found that they were able to do microcycles microcycles of 5 seconds, where you're on for 5 seconds and you're off for 3 seconds, and repeat for a total of 20 seconds. And then using this pattern and repeating this pattern allowed them to dose the stimulation in such a way that you don't have to keep it continuously on by turning it on and off. And you can dose it with lower parameters. This dosing paradigm and its resultant power savings was a primary thrust for the recent project and publication. CVRX received FDA approval in 2019 for BioStim Neo, which uses carotid biostimulation for heart failure. And well, after raising their 400 million in investment over the course of 9 funding rounds, CVRX closed a successful initial public offering in 2021, 2 years ago, and yielded gross proceedings of almost 150 million. Other news from last year as well, in October, where Tivic Health to acquire assets of Relief Band. Tivic Health is a commercial phase health technology company focused on bioelectronic medicine. Today, they announced it has entered into a definite agreement to acquire the Relief Band product line from nausea treatment and all related assets from Relief Band Technologies. And they patented products that are backed by 40 peer-reviewed clinical studies such as Tivic Health and Relief Band. And finally, regulatory affairs. Where do we start here? These are covering is from March to April, where here we see the NeuroSleeve, which we just mentioned. It's the first algorithm-powered bionic garment designed to help those with mobility issues, as you saw in the previous slides, where people were able to be regaining their mobility and their movement, right? And then other stuff where, such as ClearPoint Neuro's Smart Frame Array, which is a next generation neuro navigation system designed for use in both MRI suite and operation rooms. Other updates from a bit earlier as well, where Rune Labs, where you might be familiar with that as well, will be using the Apple Watch to monitor Parkinson's using a lot of software and sensing technologies. So motion sensors built into the Apple Watch can track the symptoms over time, and then a lot of processing in the back end to actually turn this information into useful data. In 2018, Apple added a movement disorder API to its open source research kit, which you might know about. And then Rune Labs is the first one to actually make commercial use out of this. Yeah, jumping a bit ahead, where we have NeuroEthics, Neurostar therapy for anxious depression, and Magnus Medical's Saint neuromodulation system. And the first one is a system that allows to treat anxiety symptoms for adults, for patients who suffer from major depression disorders and anxiety and so on. And the second is a non-invasive, individualized and precise treatment for severe depression as well. Both of these have been FDA approved too, which is a solution for a lot of people here. In October, getting towards the end of the year, we've had a breakthrough device designation to investigate the use of the BBS system in treatment-resistant depression. And Israel-based Brainsway's deep transcranial simulation system, with the Israeli Ministry of Health approved coverage applicable of deep TMS for the treatment of depression. 1 second. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, here we continue with more updates from the industry with NeuroOne's Evo SEEG system, which is made for less than 30-day use, recording, monitoring, and simulating equipment for electrical signal at the subsurface level of the brain. As we've been showing throughout this, these are opposed to cortical electrodes, where they provide a similar function at the subsurface level of the brain by using a much less invasive process that does not require removal of the top portion of the patient's skull. And almost finally, we have the WISE, which received FDA's clearance for its WISE cortical strip, which is a single-use medical device intended to be used on the brain surface for intraoperative neurophysiological monitoring. The first cortical strip embedding the electrodes in a highly compliant thin film of silicon to receive the FDA clearance. And then closing this with what's next, which is our keynote speaker. So just to go quickly through these, kind of bullet points of highlights from last year, where the FDA leapfrog guidance on medical BCIs, Chile plans to regulate all neurotech and ban the sale of brain data. But as you know as well, Chile is one of the countries that has been putting together a lot of work on neuroethics. Here we have more updates on this with human rights too, which is something that is super relevant to what's next. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest note speaker for the day, Dr. Francis Shen, who is a member of the faculty at the Center for Bioethics and Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical. He's a faculty member in the Department of Psychiatry at Mass General Hospital and a Harvard University affiliated professor at Harvard Law School. The Shen Lab, following his name at Harvard, explores the emerging intersection between law, ethics, neuroscience, and AI. With a motto for the lab, every story is a brain story. Dr. Shen has co-authored 3 books, including the first Law and Neuroscience casebook, and published articles on a range of neurolaw and neuroethics topics, including computational, phenotyping, portable neuroimaging, memory and lie detection, cognitive enhancement, criminal justice, brain injury, evidentiary admissibility, sports and concussion, juror decision-making, criminal mental states, dementia, and mental health. He's currently leading the creation of a Dana Founder Career Network in Neuroscience and Society, and co-leads projects on portable MRI, the ethics of digital phenotyping in psychiatry, and pursuing NeuroTech justice, improving neuroscience training for judges too. In 2021, he was awarded the Early Career Scholars Medal by the American Law Institute, one of 2 medals awarded every other year by the ALI, for being a pioneer in establishing the interdisciplinary field of law and neuroscience. He received his BA from the University of Chicago, his JD from Harvard Law School, and his PhD from Harvard University. And with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Shen to unmute himself and come in to talk to us more about his thoughts and practice and experience on neuroethics for NeuroTech. It's a pleasure.
Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I've got about 45 or 50 minutes of presentation, and then we can open it up for discussion. And I guess if there's anything burning along the way, you'll jump at me and tell me. And I don't know how with all these screens if I'll be able to see the Q&A as I go. Probably not, but
we'll assist on this.
Afterwards. You'll do that. Great. Okay, excellent. So let's dive in. I titled this talk Neuroethics for Neurotech, and I did that for a reason. Sometimes in different communities, both research and industry communities, neuroethics is seen, as it might have been seen years ago, as the ethics police, coming in to slow down progress and tell you all the things you can't do. And that's just not an accurate description of what contemporary neuroethics does. If it was ever an accurate description, certainly not now. And so I'm going to talk today about a number of neuroethics issues, but I'm going to think about them in terms of what they can do for you in neurotech, either as a developer or a student or someone who wants to get involved and in a range of different things. We'll come back to that. I have no disclosures to make, but I do want to acknowledge funding from the Dana Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, and a variety of NIH funding programs. Thank you to all for that work. Those words are only mine. They don't represent any of the funders' views. So I'm going to start with the punchline, and then I'll give you a little introduction to my work, how I fit into the field. I want to ground our conversation of the present and the future in the past, and unfortunately some examples of neurotech gone wrong. We'll take on some illustrative neuroethical issues, including enhancement, since that's one of the objects of the day, but also some other things. I'll offer a case study around neurotechnology and mental health, and we'll wrap up with a few final words about the importance of engagement in any sort of neuroethics and neurotechnology development. But first, let me just start with the punchline and a few sort of definitional items to get out of the way. When I use the term neuroethics today, I'm going to use it very broadly to encompass both ethical, legal, and social implications, but also a related, but sometimes distinct set of issues around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, sometimes called JEDI challenges. I'm also going to use the term broadly to use neuroethics sort of as a stand-in for the more accurate but less elegant neuroscience and society. It's too many syllables to say all the time. But I do want to flag for you, and I think many of you know this, but if you don't, you should know, that there are all sorts of neuro and fields: neurolaw, neuroeconomics, neurophilosophy, neurocriminology, neurosociology, and a whole bunch more. And I mention this because the technology that is being developed in neuroscience, again, broadly defined, is going to have implications in a wide variety of sectors, not just in biomedical research and medicine. So again, I'm going to use that term broadly. And I'm also going to use the term neurotech broadly. Now, I think a lot of the folks in this call are probably in the wearable and implantable worlds, but most of what I say is also applicable to ingestible and certainly digital. And in fact, in the slides before, we saw some connections to digital technologies. And these things are integrated in many ways. All these things that measure and or modify human brain function. Okay, so let's take a walk down neuroethics street. And here is my punchline. My view is that the most important thing that neuroethics can give to you is what might be called, fancy word, but it's pretty simple, reflexive practice. What does that mean? Thinking about what you do, carefully thinking and reflecting what you're doing, what you're not doing, why you're doing it, and how the technology you're creating or putting into the field promotes the values that you care about. Neuroethics, again, broadly defined, helps us see how development and deployment of neurotechnology doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? This is happening in the real world, in a country, in a city, in a community where the ethical, legal, social, political, and cultural context matter. They matter both for development and for deployment. So if there's one question that I'd like you to think about as we walk through this, and I've got one for developers and one for students, and I know there might be people who don't fit into either box, but I think they'll get most of the range of folks on this call. So if you're a developer, does your neurotechnology team regularly hear from every voice the team needs to reach its full potential? Do you hear from the voices you need to? And for students, how might you pursue a career in neurotechnology while also pursuing your passion to create a better world? Again, mixing this desire for technological advancement, but also thinking about how that advancement might or might not promote the values you care about. So we'll come back to these questions, but I want to put them on the table. I want to acknowledge at the start that I'm only going to talk about a tiny slice of the world of neuroethics. There are so many things we could talk about if we had more time, and so many resources that you could go find. So I'll share these slides with you guys afterward, and you can post them wherever you want. But these are just some of the resources that I would recommend from the Dana Foundation, the NIH, in the EU side, the Human Brain Project, if you're a Canadian, NeuroEthics Canada, the Mexican Association of Neuroethics, the New Institute of Neuroethics run by Dr. Karen Rommelfinger, the International Neuroethics Society. Hope many of you are members. If not, come join us. MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Law and Neuroscience, and others. So if you get interested in this or you want more, you can go find it. If you are a student, postdoc, or anyone thinking about a career change in the space of neuroscience and society, I hope you'll be in touch afterwards, because we do not have it yet, but we will later this year have a website and some resources up and running for a career network in neuroscience and society, specifically aimed again at students or recent students or people in a transition mode, and especially those who may not be able to yet or have had the privilege, say, of learning from some of the things that we've just heard about. So we'll be doing a lot more of that connecting, and if I come give this talk again in a year, we'll have a brand new set of slides. So get in touch about that. All right, so how do I fit into that broad spectrum? I don't do everything. We do a lot in our lab. The Shen Lab now just moved to Harvard. We're at the intersection of law and ethics, neuroscience, and AI. And our lab motto, every story is a brain story. But there are two immediate caveats. Caveat one, every story is not yet a fully understood brain story, or maybe even a poorly understood brain story. And this uncertainty, that is, we know something, but not enough, is really at the crux of a lot of the neuroethics issues. And the second caveat, and I've already alluded to it, is that every story is not just a brain story. It's a story of history and politics and economics and culture and society. And so when we're talking about neuroethics, we can't forget about all those other elements that make up who we are and the way that technology will be deployed. So we pursued two big questions, and I think both will be applicable to my talk today. On one hand, we think about developments, say developments in neurotech and AI, and how they might impact the law and policy. How does better understanding of brain-mind behavior facilitate a more just legal system? And there's a huge ethics connection because these technologies aren't ready yet. We've got to develop them. How do you ethically develop such technologies? There's also an area which many of you, if you're going through regulatory processes, are well aware of, which is that you can't just do anything you want in the market. Law and regulation constrain or restrain, or in some cases let the reins off development. So how can legal governance of technology, AI, neuroscience unleash the power that it's capable of, at the same time improving health and mitigating potential harms? And again, ethics is really key, because that balance of risk and harm is going to require us, we, to think about what we value and what we don't. What we actually do in our lab, we do a lot of empirical work, theoretical work, legal work. We do a lot of education and outreach, policy work. We've got all kinds of students who've been in and out of the lab, and over 150 co-authors. I joke that because we publish so many things, when I travel, I don't pick up souvenirs. I collect co-authors. So maybe at the end of this, I'll collect another co-author. We love collaborating across all kinds of areas, a couple of which I'll talk about. If you're interested particularly on the neuroethics in law, you might check out clbb.org. This is the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior. I had the privilege of being executive director there for several years. And the idea there is that better decisions aligned with science can produce better outcomes aligned with justice, and neurotech plays a big role in that area. All right, so that's a little bit about me. I've given you a sense, again, where I'm oriented to in terms of connecting to the field. And of course, my interest in the work of our lab will sort of bias what I present today, though I've got a laundry list at the end of other things we could talk about. I want to start with a quote you may have heard before. It's from Nobel laureate Santiago Ramon Cajal, who is known for making these immaculate drawings of neurons and figuring out so much of how the brain is connected to each other. And he once said that the brain is a world consisting of a number of unexplored continents and great stretches of unknown territory. And of course, this is a soaring quote, and it's exciting and exhilarating. And after reading that and seeing these beautiful drawings, which I've seen on display in a museum, who wouldn't want to explore the brain and new technologies to enhance brain function? But I just want to remind us that in the real world, when there was exploration of unexplored continents and those great stretches of unknown territory, it led to slavery, colonization, and marginalization at a scale that still reverberates today. And technology was also at the core of that exploration. This is a picture from a book by Marcus Rediker called The Slave Ship, A Human History. And I'll just read the quote. "Shipbuilders were deeply complicit in the entire slave system. Without their labors, the historically specific system of Atlantic capitalism could not have operated." Am I suggesting that there's a strong parallel here? No. But I am suggesting, and I'm about to show some evidence, that good intentions and amazing discoveries do not always transfer into positive social policy. Multiple people have written on the history of neuroscience, and I've done a little bit. And the challenge I'd offer for us today is, do we learn from this history? How? So I want to give an example of enhancing the brain by making it less violent through direct brain intervention. It turns out that this is a long-standing interest from neuroscientists and clinicians. Our more recent book, 2013, came from University of Pennsylvania neurocriminologist Adrian Raine. I'm not going to talk about his book, but just to say that he scanned used PET scans to scan murderers and those who had not, normal controls, and tried to look at the neuroanatomical differences between the two. What I want to point out is that 40 years before, and this is the neurotechnology connection, there was an effort using psychosurgery to ask the same sorts of questions. This group made the cover of the big magazines. This was from Fortune magazine. And the way that they did their research was through implantable deep brain stimulation, remote control. Vernon Mark and Frank Irvin wrote this book. They were key players at Harvard and MGH. Dr. Delgado at Yale had developed remote control. And the picture I'm going to show you next, the next two pictures, I'm sort of give you a warning, they're intense. And they're sorts of research that are no longer allowed today, thankfully. But at the time they were. And this group ostensibly had good motivations. That is, they saw an intractable problem, interpersonal violence. They said, look, for lots and lots and lots and lots of years, we've had this violence problem. It seems to be getting worse. It was happening during urban riots in the 60s. And we believe that the brain, see Dr. Shen's slides a few moments ago, every story is a brain story. The story of violence must be a brain story. If we could just figure out the violent part of the brain and cut it out, boy, wouldn't the world be a better place. So they said, let's go look. And these patients were at MGH. This is one of their patients, Julia, in a pleasant mood before deep brain stimulation. They were targeting the amygdala, and they would press their remote control button. So I said the pictures are hard to look at. Julia, after DBS, rage behavior, attacking while suddenly and unexpectedly. And their vision was for a world in which psychosurgery would take a place as part of the cure for violence. There's a wonderful book called The Mind Stealers, Psychosurgery and Mind Control. It came out in 1978. And I'll just give you a sense of what the book talks about. A so-called scientific rationale is being spawned to explain some of the critical dilemmas of the day, such as the rising tide of violence. With the public demand for speedier solutions to the crime wave, by the way, does that sound familiar today? Coupled with the burning desire for a tighter national budget, does sound familiar today? Alternatives such as psychosurgery become even more attractive. Now, thankfully, it didn't take on widespread use for a variety of reasons, which we could talk about, but it was there and it happened and it was used, and it's concerning. One more just data point before we get to the present, and that takes us back another 40 years. Egos Moniz wins a Nobel Prize for the prefrontal lobotomy. There is a simple piece of neurotechnology, not the sorts of tech that you're dealing with today, but again, the idea was to try and intervene in the brain to improve brain function, improve and enhance by reducing these violent impulses. Now, today, of course, the prefrontal lobotomy is heavily criticized, as it should be, but at the time, it won a Nobel Prize. And it was really exciting to a lot of people in the law. Let me show you. This came from the Yale Law Journal, which for the non-lawyers in the college, probably most of you, that's the equivalent of like our Nature or our Science, right? This is a big deal when the Yale Law Journal says something. They looked at this technology and said psychosurgery has startling implications for rehabilitation. Perfection of so relatively simple and inexpensive a technique as the prefrontal lobotomy promises to be a major contribution to the cure of criminals. Thankfully, and again, it was not widespread. It was used some, but it was not used in widespread ways. But the point is that the history, and there are other examples of exuberance and excitement about the brain, indeed Nobel Prize winning discoveries, still can lead to potentially problematic uses. And neuroethics and neurolaw are there to, on one hand, continue the trajectory of scientific discovery and push forward all the amazing things that neurotech will give us, but at the same time to mitigate, anticipate, and address harms such as those. So let's keep that in mind as we now think about some of the additional topics. So let's start with enhancement. And, we could talk for a lot of things, but enhancement is, I think, the topic of the day. So we'll start with that. And there's this wonderful comic. It came actually from, he's now deceased, but he was a professor here at the University of Minnesota. And he had this cartoon, and this was from about 50 years ago. And it's now well past 2016. This was my favorite slide in 2016, by the way. By 2016, man's intelligence and intellect will be able to be increased by drugs and by linking human brains directly to computers. There were other predictions, by the way, that he made that were totally off base, but this was direct on point. And it didn't even wait till 2016, but certainly that's the case. Let's talk for a second and break it down. What exactly is cognitive enhancement? Fairly straightforward and fairly not. The straightforward version is this, of course, cognition, how we acquire knowledge, how we think about it and experience it. And to enhance is to improve or increase. Now, there are different ways to think about enhancement. Some would say that it is going from the normal or the natural above, that is doing bicep curls to get stronger. And they would say rehabilitation back to the norm, that is, if you have a broken arm, doing your physical therapy is not enhancement. Bicep curls would be. There are other ways to think about it. Some would say that any movement would be enhancement. In any event, how we improve cognition are all sorts of different ways. How do we think smarter and act smarter? Well, social interventions have been, always will be, the primary method, right? From families and schools and communities, all the things that we do to improve this stuff. Indeed, it's so important in most countries, it is mandatory. There are truancy laws that say if you do not send your child to get enhanced at school, you will be penalized. So social is a big deal. Of course, with the advent of drugs, there are all sorts of internal. We could have put all sorts of other things that we ingest. Food, we've already, in the conversation just before this, talked about the gut microbiome. All that matters. And then external, and this is a lot of the work that I think this group does, right? Whether it's digital, wearable, could add implantable here as well. All ways that we might enhance, improve these sorts of brain functions. So is cognitive enhancement a big deal? Well, yes, certainly for some. And I actually could probably spend the entire rest of the 45 minutes just showing you slides related to enhancement in society. I won't. So we have other things to talk about, but to give you just a few snippets, I'm going to use some slides that I used when I gave a talk at Mount Holyoke. It's a wonderful school. And I was really struck when I was doing research for that presentation about the conversation around campus and enhancement. So this was from the student newspaper. They asked, does sleep fit into life at Mount Holyoke? And this was what one student said. I always tell my friends that I wish I could be a vampire because vampires don't need to sleep. Now, we might pause here for a second. I'm going to come back to this thread in a moment. Remember that I said that neuroethics offers us a chance to reflect and think, reflexive thinking about why is it that we're doing what we do. And we might just pause and think, what kind of culture is it where you don't want to be able to sleep? And we might have disagreement on that. Students gave some thoughts about their stress at Mount Holyoke, and here's what one said. I thought this was appropriate for an enhancement conversation. Imagine sitting down to eat lunch with friends, and instead of focusing on the conversation, you spend your entire meal fretting about a more productive way to spend your time, or feeling confident before a test, only to find out someone else pulled an all-nighter to study and immediately feeling like you are unprepared. These are examples of what it's like to be on a college campus that has a rampant stress culture. We could also have pulled examples from many professions, law firm intensity, technology sector, who's going to be here hardcore, who's bringing the mattresses into the office so that you'd never have to leave. You can be chained to your computer. And it's not just at the high level, it's at high schools too. I spent 10 years at the University of Minnesota, and this is a headline that always struck me. Minnesota high school students taking Adderall to boost academic performance. And they said we've got 100 other slides that we could go through. Now, I'm not going to talk about, maybe some of you will be thinking about the technical and medical and neurological questions. How do you actually enhance your cognition? It's a difficult question for another day. I have some thoughts on it. The evidence is really mixed. I want to focus on the ethical question. Should you enhance your cognition? Should we enhance our cognition? This turns out is also a really, really difficult question. Let's see why by going through a little case study exercise. And if we had, if we were sitting around a table, I'd open up for some discussion, and maybe through chat, we can't even pause here for a second, but let me set up our case studies. So as we think about these three things, we're going to think about what's normal, what's natural, and what should they be aiming for, and how would you respond to others, their patients or friends or participants or neighbors, if they turn to you as a gatekeeper or consul in their pursuit of the good life of happiness. So I've kept these blank for a reason, because maybe you'll see yourself in one of these or paintings that I'm about to describe. So first, let's imagine Madeline. Okay, Madeline, this is actually taken from a sort of modified, simplified version of a real story that was published a number of years ago. She is a seemingly normal high school student. She's taking 5 AP classes. She is playing field hockey and involved with other extracurriculars, including her school newspaper at her high school in the United States. She has a friend whose grades had gone from B's to A's after being prescribed Ritalin. So now Madeline is also asking for a similar pill, Ritalin or Adderall or something to keep up. Second, we've got Chris, the college student. Chris is a seemingly normal pre-med student. He has a dream of being a doctor. He's the first in his family to go to college, and he says that nothing is going to stop him from reaching his dream. Now, Chris doesn't come from any money, and he has to pay his way through college. So on top of his course load, he is working 20 hours per week and also taking that full set of pre-med lab classes. And he realizes he just can't do it all. He's looking to be able to hang in there. And third, we have we have N, our NeuroTech developer. We can fill in a name, whatever N name you want, a seemingly normal neurotech developer working at a big firm, but with the recession pending, seeing the layoffs at Google and Facebook and everywhere, feeling the pressure even harder because they're about to be the performance-based layoffs coming. He knows, she knows, and knows that some of the others on the team are operating on low sleep, but N just can't seem to keep up, really worried about keeping pace. And someone recently gave N the name of a doctor who others in the company have gone to for off-label prescription of some of these drugs. Now, this case study raises questions about whether the answer is different for any of these folks, about whether it is right for them to seek out some sort of enhancement. Could be drugs, could be the neurotechnology that someone on this Zoom call is developing. This goes back to this reflexive practice from bioethics. What is the right answer? What is the right way to even think about this question? So I hate to tell you that neuroethics doesn't provide any easy answers. But what neuroethics does provide are frameworks for going from, I don't know what to do. This is just, no. Neuroethics provides frameworks for carefully and systematically addressing really hard problems like all three of these questions pose, right? There's not an easy answer to any of these. So what might neuroethics say to this? Well, one set of items that have come up in the literature, and I cite down here at the bottom some of the literature that has addressed this, we might think about safety and risk of addiction. Right? We might think about the issue of coercion. Do we want to encourage, we might say, well, it's a free market and you do what you want to do and nobody has to do these things, but do we then spiral into, or spiral up to a world in which everyone starts doing these things? And again, it begs the question of, is that a good thing to do? That is, if the enhancement that I mentioned here was not taking pills or not spending money to buy a piece of technology to do, say, TMS or whatever it might be, but the enhancement was eating more greens and jogging 2 miles a day or being on the Stairmaster, is your reaction different? And if so, why? I'm going to go back to this slide. Why might it be different depending on the type of input, right? We encourage a lot of these things. We reward lots of types of enhancement. Should we punish others? An open question. Fairness and distributive justice. This is a big one in the neurotechnology world. Let's say you do have a piece of neurotech, your idea works, your hypothesis is confirmed, but it costs a lot of money for you to make that technology, and you have to set a certain price point, and only some can afford it. How do we handle that? There's an integrity question specific to enhancement, which is, and you may have experienced this, someone saying, I don't need that. I can just do it naturally. What is naturally? I mean, no one picked their genes, but we have that. There's a yuck factor. Some folks just don't like some of these things. And then, of course, long-term societal effects as well. What does society look like if we encourage some of this stuff? There are additional frameworks that neuroethics offers. A traditional bioethics framework would focus on questions such as justice, distribution of risk and benefits, beneficence, non-maleficence, avoiding harm, and respect for autonomy, the patient, the participants, or the individual's own choices. So we could talk a lot more about enhancement, but in the interest of sort of giving you a panoply of where neuroethics is, we'll come back to it if there are questions. I want to give you a sense of neuroethics in action, because sometimes I think for those who aren't as familiar with neuroethics, you'll see a slide like this and you'll hear say things like harms and benefits. And you're like, yeah, but is neuroethics just sitting around and asking tough questions? Is it just writing philosophy paper? No, it isn't. Now, those are really important things to do, that practice of reflection, but it's not just that. It is also, and NIH funded, because NIH realizes the value in this, as do other organizations, of structured interdisciplinary approaches to providing concrete tools for either the research, this particular example is research, or clinical or industry communities. So I'm going to give you an example of some work that I co-lead with Susan Wolf and Francis Lorenz at the University of Minnesota. They're both there around, and I think of an example of neuroethics for NeuroTech. And if you get interested in this and you can read more, we've got a website up at neuroimagingethics.org, and want to give high praise to all my collaborators. Anything I say that's useful probably comes from them, and anything else is my own mistake. So we're studying a project that involves a type of neurotech, a little bit different than wearable or implantable, but by analogy, a lot of the same issues will arise, which is mobile portable brain scanning, highly portable low field brain scanning that might allow brain scanning for virtually everyone. The idea is that just as anyone can cook, with these technologies, anyone can scan. If you know how to operate an iPad, you should be able to operate this scanner. It's no longer going to be hidden in the basement of the hospital. This thing can be wheeled, and I'll show you some pictures, right to the door. You can put this thing in a van, and again, I'll show you some pictures, and you can do brain scans on demand. These are some of the pictures of different technology and development. And again, ripped from the headlines. You can go on YouTube and look at the work of Sean Dione. He's at Brown and Gates Foundation. This is Scan-A-Van. I talked with Sean about a month ago. They're up and running. They'll take it to the house, and you can get right in their van and scan. As they say, we want to do MRI house calls. Okay, this is coming. It's already here. This is a great picture of that similar device, a different, obviously, piece of machinery coming. And they said, we needed to construct a whole building for our first MRI. This one fit in a cupboard. And of course, the technology you're developing might fit in a drawer. It's going in ambulances, it's going different places. And there are a lot of reasons to be excited about field-based and home-based neuroimaging, just as there are many reasons to be excited about the work that you're doing. Those include benefit to consumers, brain scans, neurotech on demand at convenience, increase access for researchers and clinicians who wanted to get MRI for their patients or participants but couldn't, now they can, monitoring in real life and potentially getting real life interventions, more objective data, and you can scan at much greater frequency. But there are also reasons to be concerned about these issues, and these concerns emerge out of this process that we've used over the last couple of years. Yes, anyone can operate the machine, but just because anyone can drive a car doesn't mean everyone can drive it safely. So what standards do you put in place? You can't take the whole hospital staff with you when you go out there. How do you help participants, consumers understand this brain data? What about incidental findings? What if you find something that requires more medical attention? How do you handle that? And these are just some of the examples. There are other reasons to be concerned about whether there actually will be expanded access and more diverse participation. Who will actually get access to this? What does the teams look like that are developing these things? So we've gone through a series of grants where we've identified particular issues like informed consent or privacy or reliance on AI in the cloud, return of results, and others. We've mapped out the way that data flows sort of traditionally and then flows in this new context. I'm not going to go into detail, but we've done that. We then expanded and think about international research, and I know that there are many on this call who are in different parts of the world, and thinking, and really importantly, this is really important for neurotech that is mobile. When you take that technology into remote and resource limited settings, international or domestic, we believe, and this comes from, again, 19 co-authors, a guiding principle has got to be ensuring that local communities are ongoing partners in the co-creation of knowledge. That goes back to my question, my one question for developers at the beginning. What voices are you listening to, and do you have everyone that you need around your table? It's got to produce, we think, local value. It can't just be helicopter science in and out. And this bidirectional learning and participation from stakeholders really means what it says, that it isn't just the experts who get to make all the calls and deliver the goods. It's that the entire community might have some say in how those things are developed and deployed. We go through in this article, a variety of detailed recommendations, like a playbook that can be used. And this is a neuroethics tool for developers or for anyone using portable MRI in these contexts. Like, all right, here it is, step by step, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so, as I said, you've got these, potential for this amazing stuff, but you really need high standards. And that's another reason that it's neat to be participating in this, because I think part of the work of NTX and the industry community is to get ahead of these things and develop these high standards and hold each other accountable. It's really important. So neuroethics in practice, just to close the thought on this, looks like that. We do empirical work We gather information from the public to see what they think. We gather information from stakeholders. We put that information together with our expert guidance with neurology and physics and neuroscience and developers and industry and IRB and law and ethics. And we come up with this guidance, which we'll be publishing later this year. Guidance that can be directly applicable, again, to in this case, the mobile MRI community, and analogous things can happen for the neurotech community. Okay, as I mentioned, I do a lot of my work in the legal system. I've sort of grown up as a law professor, and so I couldn't help but offer, since I've got the podium, a few slides and thoughts on the way that your neurotechnology could be used in the law. It used to be that neurotech in the law, neuroscience in the law, was conjecture of philosophers. Did my neurons make me do it? Which makes for a great philosophy seminar paper, but you're like, is that really ever going to matter in the real world? And it turns out, yes, it does. As this headline captures, my brain made me do it. Now, that's an oversimplification, but the point is that it's becoming more common. Neuroscientific evidence, neurotech evidence is going to be even more common. To give you a sense, we've got a big law and neuroscience casebook. It's about 1,000 pages long. We published the first edition in 2014. 90% of the material in that first book was just from the year 2000, just when I graduated college. And just in 6 years, we published the second edition 2 years ago. Almost 50% of the stuff, 45% of the stuff is new. New science that had not been discovered, new legal cases that had not been decided, and new commentary linking the two. The stuff is all on the rise. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but you've got more people writing on law and neuroscience. You've got more cases with law and neuroscience. You have more legislatures regulating and thinking about law and neuroscience. We track these things over at clbb.medium.com. Why is all this happening? Because a lot in law hinges on how brains work, and that means there's going to be a lot of potential for forensic use in a variety of ways of the neurotechnology you're developing. Let me just give you a couple of examples. So in the guilt phase, this is an illustrative case from the early 1990s. It was the first case where this man, Herbert Weinstein, strangled his wife, throws her out of their 13-story New York apartment building to make it look like a suicide, and gets arrested. And it's totally clear he committed the murder, but he wants to plead insanity. And so this man argues that what matters is what's going on inside his brain. And he had 2 images, an MRI scan and the PET scan showing this large cyst pushing up on his left frontal lobe. He argued that this should be used to show the jury and to help him make his insanity defense. Right? Now, this raises all sorts of questions about agency, about free will, about choice, and about this mysterious relationship between brain, mind, and behavior. The bottom line is that we have absolutely no idea what the relationship is between this abnormality and the things that Weinstein did, because there has never been and will never be a study that looks at this sort of brain abnormality and whether or not someone strangles and kills their partner or some other human being. Yes, is there some potential relationship between the things that this part of the brain does, like impulse control? Sure. But nothing approaching the causal relationship that Weinstein wanted to offer. And that's what the judge recognized. But these arguments are showing up, and they'll show up more as the sorts of technologies that are being developed allow for increasingly precise measurements of brain activity. I want to just talk briefly about the addicted brain for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the neurotech may be headed in that direction to address mental health challenges, including addiction. And 2, because addiction gives us a window into that "did my neurons make me do it" line of argument. Now, the hard determinism line out of neuroscience that says that we are all, to quote Joshua Green and Jonathan Cohen, neurophilosophers, that we are victims of our neuronal circumstances, that we have no free will, that it's all an illusion. That line of argument has made for great scholarship and hasn't had a lick of influence in the legal system. It's always taught in the neuroethics course, so we should mention it. But you walk into court and you say, my client is just a victim of her neuronal circumstances. She has no free will on her. You see, now you're not going to get away with that. But there are versions of that argument that talk about restrictions and constraints on choice that look like this. And this is from the New York Times op-ed a number of years ago saying, is it a hijacked brain? Is the addicted brain a hijacked brain? Well, let me tell you about a case in which the court had to handle this. And there have been a lot of other advances in neuroscience and addiction and law. And again, a lot of places where neurotechnology and treatment could matter, but I want to talk about doctrinal change. What does that mean? That means actually changing the foundations of the law. And this was a case a couple years ago that wanted to do that. This is a picture of Julie Eldred. She was in Massachusetts, lived in Massachusetts, and she was found guilty of stealing some money to feed heroin addiction. And she was arrested, and of course, you know, there was no question that she had done this, and the court put her on probation. And the number one requirement, so when you go on probation in the criminal legal system in the United States and in most countries, there are some requirements. That's a deal. It says, okay, you don't have to go to jail, but you do have to do several things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And the first thing you have to do is remain drug-free. Well, she does not remain drug-free. She relapses within, you know, a couple of weeks. And she argues to the court, it is unconstitutional to require me to remain drug-free because it was not my choice to use those drugs. I have this hijacked brain. I didn't have a choice. It was determined. I was a victim of my neuronal circumstance. She didn't use all those words, but you get the point. And so the court had to decide, are we going to have a legal system? This was the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. Are we going to have a system in Massachusetts that recognizes and goes as far as saying someone who has a substance use disorder cannot control whether or not they can remain drug-free? The court didn't want to go that far. They didn't find in her favor, but questions like this will show up again, neurotechnology, neuroethics in the real world, and with potentially really big consequences. Now, was that the right answer? No, we can talk about that. All right, let me add one more piece before I then I'm going to do like a case study in applied neuroethics and technology. So you may be wondering, well, does brain evidence matter? Is it special? Is the evidence that might be derived from my neurotechnology, if it ended up in the law or in society or in a policy debate, would it matter? And the answer is it might. Now, we don't know. There's not systematic evidence, and the empirical evidence experimentally sort of mixed on whether brains are special in terms of evidence, but there's some really useful anecdotal evidence, and this is an illustrative case. This is a picture of Grady Nelson. Mr. Nelson did horrible things. There was no question about it. Convicted of multiple crimes, including stabbing his wife 60 times, slashing her throat, sexually assaulted his stepchildren, and he's like this litany of horrible things. And there are two phases in the justice system. One is, are you guilty or not? He was guilty. And the second is, what do we do to you? What's the penalty phase? And this was called capital sentencing because it was in Florida in 2010. And the question for Mr. Nelson was, is he going to go to death row and get the death penalty? Or is he going to get life without the possibility of parole? And his lawyer, his name is Terry Lenneman. I've talked with Terry Lenneman before. His entire argument to the jury was that his client had a broken brain, and he wanted to introduce quantitative electroencephalography evidence. Here's our NeuroTech connection, right? He wanted to introduce this evidence. He said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client has a broken brain. Those are his words. Now, the expert used more scientific terms, but Attorney Lenneman said, my client has a broken brain. He said, it doesn't excuse his actions, but it explains them. And guess what? It explained them very powerfully. So I'm going to show you a slide with what the jurors said. You should know that in the U.S. system, jurors don't have to talk afterwards, but they can if a newspaper or a reporter comes up. And in this case, from Miami Herald, they were asked some questions. The first juror, Dolores Cannon, hospital secretary, said, when that brain evidence came in, the facts about the QEEG, some of us changed our mind. Juror John Howard, airport fleet services worker, the QEEG evidence turned my decision all the way around. The technology really swayed me. After seeing the brain scans, I was convinced this guy had some sort of brain problem. Now, they didn't all buy it. Juror Leon Benbow, retired mailman, all that scientific testimony, that was a waste of taxpayer money. That's phony. There's nothing wrong with that guy's brain. Now, because of these two votes, the jury split 6-6 at 12-person jury, and Mr. Grady Nelson went to life without possibility of parole instead of death row. This brain evidence, is so long as we want to believe the jurors, I don't see why we wouldn't, was the difference between life and death. Now, I'm on record as saying this particular evidence, for reasons we could talk about later if you want to, is really problematic in this context for the reason of causation and otherwise. But the fact remains that it made a difference. And one of the ethical questions that we ask our students is, was it a useful, appropriate, ethical use of the science to save a person's life? There's so much more we could talk about. I'll just tell you. We could talk about post-trial access to implanted neurotech devices. My colleague Gabriel Lázaro Munoz at Harvard has written excellent work on this. It is you implant the device and then your company doesn't continue making it. What about the person who's got the device? A wearable, you can just take it off. Not so with an implantable. How do we handle that? Important question. People are working on it. Oh boy, we could have spent the entire day talking about brain death and disorders of consciousness and new neurotech to communicate. And I mean, sort of, we saw that with those who can't communicate in other ways. The role of AI is so important in this world, so important that our lab transitioned and we do a lot of AI work now, not just on bias and fairness. So we could have talked about that. Could have talked about what I think is the holy grail of neuroethics and neurolaw lie detection. There was mention of neuro rights, and we could have talked about that. We could have talked about regulation. Many of you think about that, FDA, FTC, and beyond. Memory and memory enhancement and memory erasing in the law. Neurodiversity, certainly under enhancement. What is normal and natural? There are intense debates, for instance, around cochlear implants, right? Should we want everyone to hear in a certain way? Should we want everyone to process information in a certain way? Who gets to decide and why? Neuroessentialism, putting too much in the neuro bag. There's the ethics of neurosurgery, behavioral genetics in the law. I gave most of my examples from the United States, and yet through cross-country collaboration, there's so much work and cross-cultural differences. We could have talked about that. We could have talked about, and this has had a large impact in many areas, baby brains, adolescent brains, aging brains. There's a world of educational neuroscience, neuromarketing, pain, decision-making of different groups, brain injury, sports concussion. We've run a lot of programs on that. So next time, so much more, but in the interest of staying on time and walking through a case study, I'm going to move on. Okay, so we'll do a case study and then I'll offer a few closing comments. So this case study is recognizing that the deeper you go, and your neurotech is taking us into places we've never been before, deep underwater. The deeper you go in neurotech research and application, the deeper the ethical and the legal challenges. And the take-home point of this case study, it's connected to the point that I made at the outset, is that with concerted action now, like instead of waiting till it happens, and participant, patient, community engagement, the research and clinical communities can promote ethically sound and legally compliant neurotech research. And this example comes from psychiatry, but it could, be adapted for other places as well. Again, I don't do any of this work alone. We have a group of 25 plus on this collaboration. And again, I speak for myself and not the NIH and not for them, but anything useful has probably come from one of those folks. Okay, so let's set this up. The world of digital psychiatry and computational psychiatry is going to rely heavily on boundless data, captured, measured from individuals continuously, often in real time, taking that data and analyzing it with ever improving and increasing AI and ML models, all aimed at improved clinical outcomes. And your technology development focuses, it emerges both in sort of the collection, but also the analysis. And we know that we aren't there yet, right? We know that we aren't there yet, and clearly much research is needed. So I'm going to talk about the ethical issues arising in research. That is, we're at this intermediate stage. How do we do research with these promising new neurotechnologies to get to improve clinical outcomes? What are the ethical issues that arise and how do we address those? Okay, so foundationally, you may be thinking about, in your worlds, technical validation, clinical validation, and potentially regulatory approval if you're going through a regulatory process. And I would suggest, and it's not just me, there's a mountain of neuroethics, bioethics research that would suggest the same, that patient and research participant and community input at all stages of this process is really foundational, really foundational. The questions that we ask, on the one side, the ELSI questions, the ethical, legal, and social implications, what ethical duties and legal obligations emerge? And then there's this additional layered question, the JEDI questions of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Which humans are involved? Who's involved? Both on the research team and participating in the research. And who's going to get the benefits? So we've been working on this for a while. I guess we're 2023 now, so going on 4 years. These issues around computational justice, and we've done a number of programs. I just want to highlight a couple of them. One is we've run this program, and we're going to do, I think, version 2 later this year around the idea of intimate data, ensuring equity as psychiatry embraces boundless data and AI. And your neurotech is so central to this. Gathering this intimate data that has never been able to be gathered. It's certainly not at scale before. And there are a bunch of issues that get raised, question around racial, gender, socioeconomic equity, justice, and bias. And this bioethics approach is like, okay, let's keep developing the technology, but in parallel, let's also be having this conversation about who wins and who loses. I think it's especially important with these sort of digital and neurotech biomarkers in psychiatry. Why? On one hand, they're a two-way street. So a lot of the technology that I've seen already featured here is both for recording out and for sending energy in, right? So that's different than simply the watch taking information. You may also be intervening. Are you listening to the participant or their data? This is going to be a big issue as we emerge, where the participant says, I'm fine, I've been sleeping great, but the data suggests otherwise. This is a really important issue that I hope anyone who's doing work that involves catchment data would be thinking about, and that's called the bycatch effect. And I owe David Simon and colleagues who've talked about this. So they talk about the world of fishing, which I know nothing about, by the way. I presume they do. That when you go out and put your nets out and catch a bunch of fish, you're trying to get like fish X. But it turns out that your nets catch a lot of other types of fish, Y and Z. And those third parties, there may be significant risk to them from unintentional secondary collection of data. This could be the case if your digital phenotyping involves collecting text messages, for instance, and you've got text messages from third parties that are implicated. And then finally, intimate data, which is really important. And I think a lot of the data, the reason that it is so valuable potentially, that neurotech might make a difference, is because it is so intimate, right? And that raises some heightened concerns. All right, so we thought of this scenario to think specifically about one of the many questions that arise, and that is returning results. So many of you are doing or are involved with or will be doing research with your neurotech tools. And when anyone does research, they need to think about what, if anything, will we return to participants who are facilitating this research by participating in our project. And I don't mean compensation. Of course, you need to compensate appropriately those who participate. I mean the results of the research. Traditionally, return of results meant at the end of the study, once you have figured it all out, what do you tell participants? But neurotech is collecting, again, this data regularly, daily, hourly, by the minute. And so we came up with this scenario to help facilitate the ethical conundrum and try and address it. So let's imagine that university research conducting a digital phenotyping study of mental illness. They're using all kinds of things, including a bunch of neurotech. They've got smartwatches, smartphones, phone logs, internet use. They've got capacity to return results. They could, but they don't know if they should. All right. So you're measuring your neurotech data. You've got somebody wearing an EEG set or something like that, and you're collecting data real time every night or every day. Should you ever give any of that data back? Do you need, at what point? How would you know? Well, we came up with this decision matrix, a framework for, again, discussing this. What I'll flag is that a lot is unknown, because often there's unknown risk and unknown benefit because it's new, right? You've got these new technologies. And there are a lot of these where the answer is there's no default presumption. It doesn't mean, again, you throw your hands up and say, well, it doesn't matter. It means you discuss it and you attach to your values. There are a couple places where there is a presumption, or ought to be. If you think there's a high risk of returning this stuff, like let's say you've got a neurotech that's trying to detect early detection of Alzheimer's disease from gait movement or some sort of other combination of brain and body function. And you don't know if it works yet. You haven't validated this thing, right? So you've got real unknown benefit. There's high risk from returning a finding, the little like blinking red light that says, participant, you are at high risk of developing Alzheimer's. That's high risk because of the trauma that might cause someone, the worry, the things that they might go out and do, like meeting with a doctor, like paying this money. So we don't return there. But if there's by comparison, some really high benefit thing of really low risk, and how might you know if there's high benefit? You might ask your participants, like, hey, this is the sort of data we might get. Would you want to get this? Like, yeah, we'd love that. and you don't see a lot of risk, then offer return of IRs. And that community engagement piece can really flesh this out. The point is that this facilitates dialogue around, and this is just one example, return of results. Who's going to receive results from that team? What will be returned? Just like raw data, that might not be so useful. Some sort of processed data, interpreted data. Are you going to say to someone, based on your brain waves, you seem more calm than you did yesterday? Where is the data being sent? To show up on their smartphone or on the whatever you've connected with? How frequently are you doing it? Just at the end of the research project? Daily, monthly? How will you return it, and so forth? So again, the core of this framework, there's no one size fits all answer. It's study by study, data by data basis to return the return worthiness of the data. That is, what do you value? It takes us back to the very beginning. And to determine that value, to create that value statement, patient participants, community engagement, central to addressing this, and frankly, all of the other bioethics questions. All right, so we're right on time, which is good. Let me wrap up here by returning to where we started, our neuroethics street. I hope you've been thinking a little bit, developers, about this question. Do you have everyone you need on your team? Are you hearing the voices you need? And if not, where might you find them? Students, I hope you've been thinking about, okay, wait, I still love neurotech, but I see some ways that it could be misused. How do I not contribute to that misuse? How do you make sure that the future of neurotech is toward the good? So let me offer one last sort of concern and then end on a positive note. So there's a concern that there could be the illusion of participant engagement, of community engagement. And I'm really big on engaging the community. And the best practice is robust and thoughtful engagement from the very beginning to development, launch, and feedback. And this is, hopefully what we'll hear today. Engagement with the right patients, participants, community members at the right time. What's the worst practice? Just do nothing. But there's a concerning practice in the middle, and that's engagement as cover, or engagement as just a checkbox to be met with minimal level of engagement, or just convenience engagement. It's like, oh yeah, we should probably talk to somebody. Hey, who's in the hallway? You know that person in Starbucks? Let's just talk with them. The problem with that, it produces the illusion of engagement, and it's not really the same thing. So there's a group of us, and there are many of who are working on this. I just want to flag the group that's really, that we're working with. We had a Neurotech Justice Summit last week. We have an amazing group of fellows. It's sponsored by the Dana Foundation. Thank you, Dana Foundation, for all your support. Trying to work through these sorts of issues, like anticipating the future of the world that you developers are bringing us and that you students will be launching. But we really think that community engagement is the key. And so in addition to getting a bunch of smart people in a room at Harvard, we're out in the community. This was at the Museum of Science, that's just the weekend prior, engaging in this awesome NeuroFutures game where we show them technology like the ones you're developing. They place chips down and say, what would you be interested in? And we have these conversations with the community. We're having more with different groups, especially marginalized groups upcoming. To me, if you're not in the community, you got to give some pause to this question, like, should you be? It doesn't mean you have that you have to be a full-time community engagement outfit, not at all. You're a full-time neurotech developer, you're a full-time student and you're rough, but make time for it. Add it in, integrate it. Neuroethics for neurotechnology. We'd love to get you involved in the work we're doing. As I said, if you're a student, we've got this Neurotech career, Neuroscience and Society Career Network, sponsored by the Dana Foundation. We'd love to get your thoughts. We're working on it now. Neuroethics needs your help, because you developers are at the front line, and industry has got to be, the front end partner as well here. So that's where I will stop. I'm going to stop my sharing. I think I've done it right on time, and we've got our 10 minutes for discussion, and moderators, maybe turn it over to you for how we want to
I want to
do
apologize
it.
for having my camera off for the previous part. I thought it was on. So thanks again for this wonderful presentation, and I think it's more than a presentation, where it's more of a opening up a debate as well, because there's a lot of the points that are, I wouldn't say controversial, but at the same time, they are very much hot, and everybody is asking a lot of questions about a lot of these topics. So things like the limitations of technology. Do we want to standardize this? What is subjective? What is objective? How do we actually work out something that we all contribute to? How do we work out something that actually works for everyone everywhere, right? So there's all these questions. So if I might get in some of the questions that we have here, right? And then maybe we can talk about these in the next 10 minutes, however time goes. So the first question is more on the limitations of technology, right? So probably 1,000 years ago, some disease didn't exist. They existed, but we just didn't have the tools to measure that they were there, so we didn't know about them. So how do we mitigate the negative effect of the limitations of the technology of today in everything that we're doing for neuroethics? Because we might be missing on a lot of potential that will come when technology is there. But for now, we're definitely working with only what technology offers us as of today. So how do we navigate that landscape?
Well, I think there are a couple of tools. And I think, I want to say too, just at the outset, you raised this question about, how do you do all of this? And I should emphasize that, the applied neuroethics isn't trying to make every developer do everything for everyone. It's just, understanding where your spot in the community or the clinical practice world is and addressing that spot. But specifically to your question, there are different approaches in the ethics and law of emerging technologies that address this question of how can you prepare for something that you don't know it's coming? Right?
Yeah.
And there are several ways to do it. What you want to avoid are two things. On one hand, you want to avoid not being ready for the bad thing or potentially bad thing that does show up. On the other hand, you also want to avoid being really well prepared for the thing that never happened. You have wasted your time. The sort of best ways that first of all, there's no perfect way to do it, but secondly, the best ways to do it so far to get an interdisciplinary group together. There's sort of this future orienting stuff. There are methods, for many of you have participated in them, where you try and ground yourself to the reality, you track what's happening, and it's called anticipatory governance is one version of it, or responsible research and innovation. You think about the through lines, the likely trajectories, and you make preparations, not in the sense of investing $7 billion for this thing that might happen in 20 years, but in the sense of holding the workshop and having the consensus paper ready and having the details ready. But you're never going to be ready for everything. And that's important to build in this dynamic flexibility, especially around, I think, brain technology, where the brain is still so damn mysterious.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, it just is. And so it would be hubris to think that we have figured it out, but you can build that in. So one concrete way you could build that in is into the research protocol. You could have, let's take the example I was just making in return of results. Mm-hmm. You can have options to update your protocols, and you probably should. And it's happened in genetics is actually a good example where, each year we learn more and more about what a variant might mean. We didn't know 3 years ago, might not even learned a year ago. And so there are methods in place now so that a research team could go back to participants and say, this, before we had this information, it didn't mean anything. But now we've got, based on new findings from others, we know that this means something for you, and now we can deliver it. So being prepared to adjust is a good thing, but you're never going to know it all.
Gotcha. For sure. I think that brings me, I'm going to go for a second question that is kind of tied to this in an interesting way. And I'm going to try to make my own introduction on that question that we got here. So, that quote, I asked God for a bike, but I know God doesn't work that way. So I stole a bike and I asked God for forgiveness, right? So a lot of the early stage technology, a lot of the startup attitude is more like this, right? It's something new. Let's tap into it. We're not experts. Let's see what happens. And then after comes regulation, right? So that person here is asking about, do you think neuroethics limits innovation, right? In the sense of, do you think having too many things to worry about might limit our, innovation attitude and spirit?
No, I really don't think it does.
A lot of the experimentation might sound not very ethical at the beginning. Anyway, I'll give it to you.
No, I don't. I think it can, but I think law can be stymieing as well. I don't think it has to. I do think that, and I recognize, and I didn't give the case study today, but there's sometimes a case study I give where we basically have a very sympathetic developer. They've taken out 3 loans, they've invested everything they own, and they've been able to only test their technology on 50 people, and they were all white people, rich white people, because that's just who they were able to get. All right. Yeah. They have no more money. They have invested everything. Who is to say that they can't then try and market that technology certainly not me. But what I would say is that the labeling, or it doesn't have to be labeling in the formal sense, because it might not be, going through a place where there's a label. The communication about the technology ought to acknowledge that. And there ought to be clarity around then what the next steps would be. And if there are concerns about whether or not the lack of, say, diversity or representativeness in the test group matters or not. And you might think it might, or might think it might not. So I do think that it's really important that when something goes to market, that there, that there's post-trial data collected, or that there's actual follow-up, because I think that on one hand, you want to be concerned about things going to market too soon, but even more so to me is, all right, it gets to market, there aren't barriers to innovation, but there's got to be some measure of effectiveness. And you're not going to know if it's effective, and if it's effective across different groups and different contexts, like we're saying, in different parts of the world, unless you actually measure that. So I'm for radical disclosure. That's what I would be for. Experiment all you want, in my view, and others take different views, I should say, as well, certainly on this. But in general, I'd say experiment all you want, innovate all you want, but be upfront about it. And roughly, to me, that's a oversimplification, but that's thematically, I think, where part of the FDA regulation is going, allowing technology, not just NeuroTech, but others as well, to get to market, but then to have close post-trial observation to collect that real-world data that would then inform, does it actually work in the way that you intend it to do? Are there harms? Are there unanticipated benefits too? Of course, which there could be. So I think the real world data and that feedback loop, to me, is critical. And it would hopefully be critical to anyone who really cares about anything more than just selling their product, actually seeing if it works. I do have little, and I think few in the ethics world would have little sympathy for whether it's a developer or a firm or anyone whose goal was simply to maximize profits, regardless of whether the technology worked. That is fraud, and that would be problematic.
It's more about thinking, like, imagine if cars were out yesterday, right? We would have, like, with our activity today, we would have like 1 billion trillion laws on how to drive a car, right? And not everybody will be able to do it and stuff. So someone is asking, and I think we can just follow up with these last two questions. Do you think that with a lot of regulation and ethics, most of the neurotech we have today is kind of deemed like doomed to just fade away, just like lobotomies, with more regulation, just go out of the way, right?
No, lobotomies didn't work because of regulation. Lobotomies didn't work because they were a horrible idea. And let me rephrase that. Lobotomies are actually still used in certain treatment-resistant contexts. So I want to put an asterisk by it. So any clinician would say, wait a second, the way that that the lobotomies were thought that they might be used, like wide scale use to make people less violent, that was a horrible idea because the science was particularly bad. That had nothing to do with it just died because so I think that well, a couple of things. Ethics and law and regulation aren't identical. That is, ethics often is needed in spaces where law and regulation are gray or non-existent. But I do think there's a balance, but I don't think it's to me, I don't think that ethics stifles innovation. I think, and I don't see why radical transparency would stifle innovation. Now, I do think that there is overreaction in the law. There are too many criminal laws in my view. There are too many regulations for a lot of reasons, but that's actually a neuroscience question as well, because humans are lawmakers are humans, and they respond. They don't. And by the way, all of us on this call also respond. We the next time you make a big decision based on, oh yeah, my buddy said this was good. What? You didn't do any research? Like, our scientists, oh yeah, they said that's good. Okay, I do the same thing. So a lawmaker makes a law because they saw something in the newspaper headlines that said, this blew up. So wait a second, but it's still a lot safer. That's why people are, they're scared of riding and flying in planes, but they're much more likely to die, and there's all the other things. So the neuroscience of fear in legislation, I think, is a problem. I do think there are ways in which regulation can get in the way. But at least the way I laid it out here, I am not, I will make clear, I'm not advocating for some sort of draconian law in the future of
No, for sure.
neurotech. I think they're pretty basic requests, which are tell us what you're doing, tell us why you did it, and when it goes in the real world, see what happens and be candid about it.
Yeah, we're responsible for it. And then my last one, I think that's one that it's very relevant, right? Which is, how do we make laws that work for a cross-cultural context, right? Because this is another very important topic here that I think we can just close the questions and answers with it.
Yeah, that's not, I don't have a great answer for that at all, other than to say, I think respecting, I would be in the favor of respecting local autonomy. I'll just give one example, and this is two regions of a much more diverse world, and I'm not a privacy scholar, but in short, the European approach to brain privacy and other sorts of privacy is roughly, you firms or government can't do anything with the data unless you're explicitly allowed to by the user, and sort of the flip in the United States, which is you can do anything unless the user explicitly tells you no, which is why, although there have now been some differences, but the European data protections are different than the US. And of course, businesses have to navigate that, right? They have different, they operate differently in different sectors, and that varies, further across the world. So I don't think there's any particular answer to that. I think that the fields of neuroethics, and actually all the other fields I mentioned, have been Eurocentric and North American centric. That's slowly changing, and it really should change. Conceptions of the good and the just and the ethical vary. We know they vary across cultures. I think you asked a great question. I don't have a great answer other than at least the work we've done. We've tried to hopefully broaden the group that we're listening to, but that's the best I'd say.
Okay, so like people are just pressing me to ask more questions. So is it okay to pick up like one or two more questions?
Okay, quickly, and then I think because I think we were set for 3. I know
Sure.
you have another agenda also.
I
Sure.
just don't want to because they're saying like I'm not asking like what there was.
Okay, you tell me whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you. Whatever you want me to do.
Okay. So say we can spend much time creating ethics for a given subject. Still, there are those who would defy ethics intentionally. What can the rest of us do to account for this, short of making a law on charging unethical behaviors with a crime?
Great question. So industry standards and industry, I don't necessarily mean large industry. It could be small industry, and also metrics of documentation and metrics of the right way to do things and of success. In fact, I think getting the government involved in that level is, for the reasons we've just been talking about, becomes problematic. That's not easy to do to ensure compliance across a community. I mean, it's really tough to do because there may be benefits. It's a collective action problem for sure, but I think that would be one option. I mean, there are in particular situations, you all will know your industries better than I will, but I'll say that there have been solutions that amount to something like there is some benefit that the group can offer, working as a group, access to this, access to that, preventing you from getting into somewhere. And so restricting membership in the group can matter. And that's how a lot of the professional associations work. That's how law works. So when we have a lawyer who's rogue, we disbar her or him or them. Mm-hmm. Same thing in medical profession, right? So that sort of thing can work. Now, it's more difficult to do when you're outside of those professional organizations and you've got just a stream of entrepreneurs, and the mantra is fake it till you make it, and the other team is faking their data, and they're going to get the IP, the venture capital first, and you're screwed. And I already said you took out 3 mortgages, so it's hard. I mean, I don't say it's easy, and I would understand compromises being made. But if possible, I think those sort of formal kind of association sanctions have worked well when it's possible to make those, and it avoids getting the criminal law involved.
Okay, and I think I'm going to merge some other 3 questions together in a very fast one just to close up. And I'm sorry everyone, because we couldn't just answer everything. If I just put them together, the question becomes, what how do we approach people who don't have access to these things? And at the same time, how do we challenge products that are put in the market in the NeuroTech, they mean, more for tech advancement and less, like they're more based on advancing the technology itself, not the neuroscience out of it?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say that no one should, hopefully nothing I said would lead to the conclusion that neuroethics is suggesting that every firm have as its mission to eliminate poverty and level the playing field. That's not the goal. Your goal is to make awesome neurotechnology that advances whatever it is you're advancing. I think what I am saying is that in the development and the deployment of that technology, there ought to, at a minimum, be an awareness, even if there's not the resources to address it, awareness of the limitations. And again, however limited, participation in efforts to address those concerns. To me, that's a palatable position to take. Less acceptable for me, I think, based on the analysis I would do, would be one, just ignorance of the problem at all. It's like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. Or two, some sort of deliberate indifference. It is, yeah, we could do it, but we don't want to. But I think the reality is that the cost-benefit trade-off is often going to be, we would love to do A, B, C, D, and E, but we can't because we don't have the capacity. Okay, that's fine. I mean, but this is where I'll go back. I'll end where I started, which is neuroethics is a reflexive practice. You have thought through it, and the reason you're not doing it is because it's not because you ignored it. It's not because you got caught up in we just do anything we want. We cheat. We don't care because that's it. We've thought carefully. You've aligned with your values. You've done the best you can. And I think, and to the extent that you can, you've engaged the community. Again, your slice of the community, whatever that means. To me, that's a better world than the alternative, and I think that's doable.
Awesome. I think that was just a great way to loop back to where we started and then conclude this session. It's been amazing.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here, and thanks for all these insights on a lot of different topics. And I'm apologizing again for people who I couldn't just voice their questions. You can definitely write them in the chat, the public chat. So probably we can answer them after. Now do you have anything to say? Okay. So now I just want to pass up to the next up. We have Dr. Christopher Guger. Let me share my screen for a sec. Introduce. So as you know, GTech, probably you all know it. It's a medical engineering company that has been founded by Dr. Christopher Guger and Dr. Gunther Endlinger in 1999 in Austria. GTech develops and produces high-performance brain-computer interfaces and neurotechnologies for invasive and non-invasive recordings for research or for clinical purposes, and for playing around as well. You can do a lot of cool stuff. You can type, do art, and so on. With that, I'd say myself and NeuroTech are proud to have GTech as an NTX Buzz and Review 2023 sponsor. And up next is Dr. Christopher. He's going to talk to us about the really cool device, Unicorn Gaming Interface. And Dr. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I share my screen. So I will show you in a few minutes what we are doing in the BCI and neurotechnology field. So I'm based in Heidelberg in Austria. That's a very small village. And here we are doing the international sales and also research projects in Graz, in the south of Austria. We are doing our hardware production. And we're also in New York, USA, in Albany, and in Barcelona, where we have research going on in Vancouver, in Canada, in Hong Kong, and also in Sapporo, in Japan. At the moment, we are running about 15 different research projects, mostly with the European Union, but also with the USA and Japan. And all these projects have something to do with brain-computer interfacing. In Coma Aid, for example, we are using EEG and FNIF to get more information of patients with disorders of consciousness. This is a little bit related to the previous talk. So our system, it's a medical product, MindBeagle, is able to figure out if a coma patient is able to follow conversations. And then we can use BCI technology to answer yes and no questions to confirm the questions that we are asking. And in recovery, that's another project. We are using BCI technology to treat stroke patients, and we have one standard operating procedure for upper limb treatment and another one for lower limb treatment, and we get very nice results. And here's a nice study from Abdel Kader that came out recently, and we compared different companies and looked at the different applications that they're realizing. You can see with GTech products, we have actually 54 different medical applications which are realized with our brain-computer interface technology. This just shows for how many different fields you can use it. And one of these medical products is Recoverix. This is already a medical certified device in Europe, but also in many other countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and many more. And this is our brain-computer interface to treat stroke patients. So we put a wireless EEG headset on the stroke patient, have a computer screen in front of the patient telling him if he should imagine a left-hand movement, a right-hand movement. The patient imagines the movement, and then we stimulate in real time the hand, in this case the left hand, so that the dorsiflexion is really done. This is repeated 240 times in one session. Patients are coming back for 25 treatments, and we are getting highly significant results with this setup. So just in our own rehabilitation center, we already did 30,000 treatments here in Austria and Heidelberg. And this is also the reason why we have many happy customers. And you can also see that it's used by many different companies and universities. So we have a lot of people in aviation, Airbus, BMW, for example, gaming companies like Valve, big companies like Samsung and Meta, and of course a lot of universities like Harvard and MGH in Massachusetts. And more for the consumer and end user market, we started to produce the Unicorn Hybrid Black. It's a very easy to use but high quality brain-computer interface. Basically, you just have to start it on with the button in the back, and then it's already streaming the data to the computer, and you can analyze your EEG data. The interesting is that we are using here hybrid electrodes. So you can see they have 8 little pins. They are 7 millimeters long, just to penetrate the skin and go through the hair layer. So we can do a dry recording without electrode jail, but in the middle of the electrode, there's also a little hole. And this allows us to inject electrode jail for getting a very robust recording. And for some applications, dry electrodes are nice, but for other applications, wet electrodes are performing better. And with this system, you can just select the ideal setup. And I'm showing you here a video from Martin Waldhofer, one of our computer scientists. And he's recording 8 EEG channels with the Unicorn Hybrid Black. You can see all the electrodes are marked in green. This means we have good EEG data quality. And then Martin is going to do a backflip in the backyard of our company. You can see he's jumping, and during the recording we see some artifacts because there is a high G-force, but immediately afterwards we have clean EEG data again, and he can even walk along with the unicorn and we don't get artifacts. And this is essential when you're running brain-computer interface experiments. You need ultra clean data, and the purity of the EEG data should be perfect because you don't want to lose any second of data. You know, there are some headsets where you're losing more than 50% of the data. And this is just unacceptable when you're working with patients. For coma patients, most of the time you just get a few minutes recording time. And if you're losing more than 50%, you're just wasting their time. And we have also a module that's called Oscar for cleaning out artifacts in real time. So Johannes is wearing here our Unicorn Hybrid Black. On the row, on the top scope, you are seeing the raw EEG data that we're recording from 8 channels. And on the bottom scope, you're actually seeing the cleaned EEG data after the Oscar online processing. Now, Johannes is going to produce a couple of artifacts, like he's clenching keys here. And you can see the artifact is completely cleaned out. Shaking the head, bending the head, we get some muscle contamination here. On the bottom, you see the EEG data is clean, shaking the head rapidly. And with this module, you can additionally save a lot of data. and you can reduce recording time, which is of course also important for a stroke treatment that we are doing and for many other experiments. And it also enables new experiments, for example, in aviation, where people are more moving. Here you can see how we are doing brain-computer interface nowadays with the Unicorn Hybrid Black. So performance is everything. We do everything that we can measure performance, and we want to achieve perfect EEG and BCI control. So in this case, Bernard from Hong Kong, one of our computer scientists, is doing the demo. You can see the Unicorn Hybrid Black is assembled already on his head. It's switched on, so it's blinking. You can see the LED on the device. And he's starting up our unit interface for the Unicorn Hybrid Black. First of all, he is waiting for perfect data quality. You can see here the green lights. This means all 8 EEG electrodes are good. And after 1 second, he can already basically start with the calibration. So all what he is doing is to look in the middle of the screen, focus on the stimulation that we are giving here. This takes about 20 seconds, and then the brain-computer interface is already trained on his personal EEG data. So like 10 years ago, we needed 5 minutes of calibration data. 20 years ago, we needed 1 day. Nowadays, we need 20 seconds for training this type of brain-computer interface. That's ultra important to have a very short calibration time. 20 seconds don't matter anymore. And then we are showing 30 items that he can actually select with the brain-computer interface. So he's just now looking from one item to the next one. And the red little circle that you can see here is showing us the decision that the brain-computer interface made. So he's looking here, selected. Now he's looking onto this item, selected. Next one is on the bottom, selected. Now it's the top one again. Second column, selected. So you can see it takes about 2 seconds for making a new selection. We don't get false positives. So if he's not looking at anything, then the BCI system doesn't select anything. And we can just select one of these 30 icons very rapidly, only after 20 seconds of calibration. And it's actually going like that until we reach the last icon, second last, and watch at the last one. So he didn't make a single mistake, and this is what we understand under brain-computer interface performance. It has to work perfectly, and otherwise there's a mistake in the signal processing, data acquisition, or whatever. And with the unit interface, we can also do other cool things. So here we are using steady-state visually evoked potentials. That's again the calibration phase. So the little GTEC icon is showing us the target icon where the person should attend to. Basically, we are training on every single control item that we want to use in the game. Then we can use it with augmented reality setup. So we have a head-mounted display, the Nautilus system, in this case, another wireless system from us, underneath the head-mounted display. And by looking at the augmented reality markers, he can, for example, switch on the light bulbs. And here's a little maze, so a little game that he can control inside Unity. So you can see the red ball. He's focusing now to the left side, and the ball moves to the left. Now he's moving the ball upwards. You can see we get a very continuous control signal. There are no mistakes. We need about 1 second from switching one item to another one, from one movement to another one. But it's a pretty nice, continuous and rapid control that we are achieving in Unity in this case. And in a few moments, he is actually reaching the target. And in this case, we are having the controls beside the maze, but you can also put the controls directly on the little ball. And then the controls are moving together with the item. This is also very nice if you want to control avatars, then you can actually embed these stimulation rectangles directly into the avatar to move it along a computer game, and so on. And here's another example. In this case, we have a Unity game implemented with the Unicorn Hybrid Black. And I'm using my computer keyboard for moving along with the avatar. So with the arrow keys, I can move forward, left, towards, backwards, and so on. The space bar, I can jump. With the brain-computer interface, I can destroy these obstacles, which are shown in the computer game. And when I focus on them, then they're exploding, and I can collect the coin. When I get a hold of the coin, then the little bridge here is closing, and it allows me to progress in the computer game. So I follow the path. Of course, I should not fall down. Now I have to avoid one of the enemies, and I can mentally destroy the next box, which is blocking the way. And this is a task that I can only do with the brain-computer interface, so there's no keyboard control available for that. So I get the next coin, the bridge just behind me closed, and I can continue in the game. This means I can only complete the game if I can master the BCI control perfectly, and otherwise I have no chance to do it correctly. So now I can continue until I find the next obstacle, and I can destroy it again. And we placed many of these boxes into the computer game, and in this way, it makes a lot of fun to use the brain-computer interface. So this is all implemented in Unity and very easy to use. So basically, you can just move the controls to the desired game logic, and then you can already use it. So you don't have to implement the signal processing, the calibration, that's all done. You can just place controllable elements into Unity. And another application, the last one that I would like to show you, is our unicorn blondie check. In this case, we are showing different images for 100 milliseconds, so only very brief, to the participant. And the person is just observing the images and not doing anything else. And in the background, our BCI system is analyzing the EEG data and making a ranking of the most important picture for your brain. And we always get very fascinating results. So I start now the blondie check so that you get an idea how this is actually done. So the person is just observing for a few seconds, and afterwards we can already make a ranking, and you can see the blonde girl is the most important picture in this picture set. So we have human beings first, and we have cats and dogs, and on the bottom we have some landscapes. This has also very serious applications, so you can use it for neuromarketing. And when you're showing different logos, you can actually select the most important logo, or you can also check which logo works for participants and which ones you should avoid. Or you can also test different food types, hamburgers versus bananas, and you can see where persons are reacting. And once we used it at Ars Electronica Festival, and this was also funny, because I had a lady from Argentina, and she was looking at the picture sets. Then suddenly men with a big beard were ranking on the first 6 positions. And then she looked at her husband, and he didn't have a beard. So it can also lead to pretty embarrassing situations. And with that, I would actually close my presentation. I just want to invite you to the BCI and Neurotechnology Spring School that we are running in April, starting on the 17th of April until the 26th. So it's 10 days of educations. We have 120 speakers. And last year we had more than 5,000 participants from all over the world, actually coming from 107 countries. And this year we already have 1,000 people registered. We announced the program last week, and I hope that we get the biggest spring school this year ever. So it's free. Please let your teammates know, your students know, your faculty know, and just participate in this free event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. That was great. And I must say as well, you probably want to correct me, that usually the spring school ends up with the hackathon, right?
In the middle of the spring school, there's the hackathon, Saturday and Sunday. So we have a lot of funny projects also this year. We have programming projects, data analysis projects, and new this year is that we also have gaming projects. So people can use the Unity interface that I just showed to build computer games. And this will lead to very fascinating results, I'm sure.
Exactly, and I have to say myself that I have been in this hackathon. I actually went to the site in Heidelberg where you guys are, maybe 2 years ago. Yeah, that was great. So let me just fast before we go to the NeuroBar, ask some questions that have been posted here. The first question is like, why GTech? What does GTech has as advantage over other options?
So we are doing all the research, production, development in-house. This means we can do everything from the electronics to the programming to the FDA clearance and certification in different countries. This gives us a lot of flexibility to make custom solutions. So we work together with many university hospitals and companies, so they can select products of our portfolio, but we are also able to adapt it very effectively because we have all the knowledge in-house. And it's nice that we have the whole palette from research instruments. So you can select from 8 channels up to 1024 channels. So we produce the first EEG system that can actually record from 1024 channel, which gives you a never seen spatial resolution. The devices can also be used for ECOG, for invasive recordings, grid electrodes, stereo electrodes. So you can do high gamma mapping, also ultra high gamma mapping. So with our systems, you can record up to 1 kilohertz because the activity is not hidden in the noise floor. And this enables fascinating experiments like CSAPs. And we have medical approved devices. So this makes it easy to work with patients, stroke patients, Alzheimer patients, Parkinson, coma patients. So the ethical approval is much easier. And you can also, figure out with many channels where the sources of activity are located, with a lot of EEG channels and the real-time closed-loop experiments. And when you gain the knowledge where the activity is really sitting, then you can slim it down to the most important electrode locations. Then you can work, for example, with cheap devices like the Unicorn Hybrid Black to deploy it to many patients or end users, depending on what you're doing. So it gives you a lot of different options.
Yep. We have one person asking here if could the RecoverX also work for stroke patients with dysphagia? I don't know this word, I'm sorry. Dysphagia?
Works also for that. So our main treatment is, of course, for spasticity and fine and gross motoric skill, but we have also a lot of side effects, and all of them are positive. We see, for example, better concentration performance, better memory functions, better bladder control. The paretic side starts to sweat again, temperature control gets normal, and my favorite side effect is that speech improves. We are just training dorsiflexion, and suddenly they speak better. So there are a lot of positive side effects. And this can be explained that the motor cortex has a lot of relations in cortical networks with other functions. So if we think about language functions, for example, I need, of course, the tongue and the lips for producing language. I need the auditory cortex for hearing something. Then I need Wernicke's area to understand the question. I need Broca's area to formulate the answer. And finally, I need motor mouse for giving the answer. And with RecoverX, we are activating the sensory motor region, and so we produce also an effect on the whole language network and also other networks inside the brain. This explains all the different side effects that we are getting.
And we have this question. Well, I think the answer is you can find it on the website, but I would just ask it anyway. The question is, what exactly comes with the Unicorn Black? Am I able to download the raw EEG datasets when I just buy the headset? Because I think he's referring to things like Emotive, where you have to pay a subscription to get the raw data. And then he's asking if he can sync the dataset with Python for live online classification. I can say myself, I've been working on this as well, and we've used MATLAB and Python, and it works nicely. So I'll leave the answer to you.
Yeah, with the Unicorn Hybrid Black, you get a lot. You get the .NET, the C# interface, you get the recording software, you get the permanent license, so you can use it forever. There's no additional fee. This is all included in these 990 euros. And additionally, you can also get the Python API. a Simulink interface, if you like MATLAB and Simulink,
Exactly.
and also the Speller. And on GitHub, we have a lot of resources like lab streaming layer. And then you can just stream directly from the Unicorn via LSL to other devices. We have also an interface to Android. Then you can stream to the mobile phone directly. So there are a lot of resources available. You can also control, for example, a Sphero robot. That's including, we have a painting application that allows you to make drawings. And we have the Blondie check as an add-on.
Like the one behind you, right?
Yes. This was actually a painting from Ars Electronica. Dragan Ilic hooked up a Guger robot, a big industrial robot, to a brain computer interface. Then during the festival, over 5 days, people could put on the PCI system and contribute some pieces to the artwork that you are seeing here. Actually, the painting is huge. It's like 5 meters by 4 meters big. I guess you have seen it in children.
Yeah. And I like it.
It's good.
That's great. I think we just have one more last question, and I think it's quite important as well. Well, it's 2 questions inside one question. So the question says, the GTech is involved in a lot of applications in the neurotech sphere in terms of research and therapy and gaming. So what have you observed as the main trend of last year? And then the next question is, if that's what you observed the trend, because there's a lot of people here who are thinking to get into this, they're asking, where do you see there's more support and funding happening? And what has the trend that you saw for the last year?
So a big trend is, of course, neuromodulation. So not only sensing from the brain, invasive or non-invasive, but also stimulating the periphery or the brain itself. Because with this closed loop experiment, you can do much more fascinating work. And the big trend is also diagnosis. So nowadays, EEG systems are used for all different kinds of illnesses to detect it and to put it also into reports, which are handed over to neurologists or physicians to figure out more about the brain. And this is, of course, very trendy because it can help to figure out illnesses much earlier and to do something against it. So for Recoverix, for example, we can do a 10-minute resting state analysis. We put it into our data analysis server. We run different algorithms, and then we can predict how much a Recoverix, a stroke patient, will improve by the treatment. This is possible with only 10 minutes of resting state EEG data. So this is a new trend, analyzing EEG data to predict illnesses or to predict the outcome of therapies.
And just out of curiosity, if you can just talk us a bit about, because you said neuromodulation, I just want to make sure that people here, I'm sure they have a question. Were you addressing invasive or non-invasive? And then one of them was a trend or not?
So both of them are very trendy. So in invasive neuromodulation, you can do fantastic things. For example, cortical evoked potentials. So you can stimulate into the brain. And from other regions, you can observe where evoked potentials are produced. So let's say you are stimulating into Broca's area. Then you will find evoked potentials in language-related regions like Wernicke's area, auditory cortex, motor mouse region. And by just stimulating one single piece of the cortex, you are able to identify the whole language network. So it's a very elegant way of identifying networks. And we developed a strategy that you can map the whole brain within 60 minutes. So we have an automatic routine stimulating all pairs of electrodes within 1 hour. And afterwards, we have identified all the networks inside the cortex where the electrode grids, of course, were placed. And for the non-invasive space, you can stimulate, for example, the periphery by doing functional electrical stimulation. This is what we use, for example, for stroke patients. But you can also use TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is EEG triggered in reha setups, for example.
Beautiful. I think that was it. That was a wrap. That was great. I think we've had a lot of full input and a lot of complementary stuff. These were the main questions that we've had. I'm not sure we have any more. Yeah, we don't have. So with this, I think we're just on time, which is perfect. So with this, I want to thank everyone for being here. Dr. Shen, Dr. Christoph, all the people who joined today. and all the community, and a shout out for the team in London for the chapter. They're doing a in-person kind of watching this event as well, which is cool. So cheers to that. And I want to invite everyone now to, if they want to stick along because we're going to next have the Neurobar. So have a good one, everyone.